Hi, I'm Emily Freitag. I'm co-founder and CEO of Instruction Partners.
And I'm Jessica Henderson-Rockette, and I am Director of Science here at Instruction Partners.
And we are excited to talk to you today about what we have learned about how to address unfinished learning in science instruction. So up front, we are doing this tour of different disciplines to understand what it really looks like to address unfinished learning effectively within that content area. We know that supporting unfinished learning is complex. It is unsexy work. It lives in the details of instructional decisions. And we know that it's different for every subject, that the nature of the subject changes the way that we need to think about how we support unfinished learning. And I'm so excited to be talking about science today. Little has made me more passionate about the importance of science instruction than becoming a parent and watching my young kids engage with the world. And I think we all know that science instruction doesn't always get our first breath of attention in education, and yet it has never been more relevant or more important. In our Rethinking Intervention series, we heard from so many content experts about just how important science education is going to be in the next couple of years, how much it can really advance the exact kind of learning that our students are craving and really need. And so we're excited to dig into what we know about the discipline and what we know about how to support unfinished learning in this short video. So Jessica, I'm so glad to have this time with you. And why don't I hand it over to you to start by telling us, what do we know about science?
Thanks, Emily. I am excited to be here too, and definitely excited to have the opportunity to talk about science. So maybe the first thing that we need to really think about is what we found that science is not. What we know is it's not a set of separate disciplines. It's not a set of facts or theories to be memorized. It's not labs and projects and hands-on activities that are disconnected from the universe and the world around us. It's actually none of these things in isolation. Instead, science is grounded in the explanation of phenomena. And you're going to hear that word a lot. So let me just stop and tell you, all that means is an observable event that occurs in our universe. Science learning should be structured around explaining our world, what's happening around us. Questions like, why do we get sick? Why does the moon look different tonight than it did last week? How did something as huge as the Grand Canyon form? These are the phenomena that we want students to be able to scientifically explain after they come out of our classrooms. And so within the structure of science education, we want students to engage in scientific processes like asking questions and investigating and analyzing data, modeling. And we want them to do those things in order to derive evidence and build their understanding of science ideas, while they reason with that evidence through the lens of some interdisciplinary themes, things like patterns or systems or scale or energy and matter. And if we give students the opportunity to engage in this process, they're going to be able to achieve the goal of science, which is at its core to construct evidence-based explanations for events that happen in the world around us, those phenomena that we're going to talk about quite a bit here.
I love it. So tell us about unfinished learning. Like, how does, we're hearing so much about learning loss or unfinished learning. And I know teachers are quite worried about, how do I support students coming in if they might have missed some learning time last year? How is science constructed in a way that interacts with unfinished learning?
So it's interesting because when we consider how we can attend to unfinished learning in science, it's really critical to note that science structured in the way we just talked about, effective science instruction, is actually built to attend to unfinished learning, because scientists operate with unfinished learning all the time. That's what they do. They figure out what they don't yet know. They ask questions that you can investigate and explore. They derive evidence, and then they use that to develop their understanding of the world. So if we consistently allow our students to engage in that same process, teachers are actually going to be able to attend to unfinished learning without sacrificing access to grade level content for students.
So interesting. So scientific learning is all about unfinished learning. And so we don't need to think about what we've missed. We just need to think about the questions that are emerging around that discipline or that phenomena as you're talking about.
Yeah.
So how would you like practically plan to attend to those areas of unfinished learning that might be more pronounced this year?
Yeah, definitely. Right. What does this look like for teachers? What can we do to plan for unfinished learning in science? And importantly, how do we maintain the integrity of the structure of science while also providing access to all students and valuing what they bring to the classroom? So this graphic actually illustrates an approach that teachers can use to plan for unfinished learning in science. They'd want to first identify an anchoring phenomena that's going to drive instruction. Then they want to determine what are the progression of the science ideas that students are going to need in order to fully explain that phenomena. Then they want to be able to plan to elicit student thinking in order to identify what are the ideas and what's the knowledge that students are already bringing to the classroom. And then they want to use that information to incorporate coherent science experiences that address any identified gaps in prerequisite knowledge or that unfinished learning.
Okay, I think I understand it, but I think an example would help.
So let's think about a middle school science teacher. What does this look like? How does this approach come to life for that teacher? Let's take the example of middle school life science. So you have this set of standards. This set of standards embodies not only science ideas around interactions, energy, and dynamics of ecosystems, but they also embody scientific processes like analyzing data and constructing explanations, along with themes that students can reason with, like patterns and energy and matter. So the question becomes, how do we create accessibility to student thinking around these ideas in these standards without using like the technical language and the jargon of the standard that's going to act as a barrier for some students?
I'm remembering like drawing pictures of ecosystems in 7th grade as you're talking right now. So tell me what this could look like in a authentic phenomena driven way.
Yeah. So this is where step one of our process comes in handy. Identifying a phenomena that can be explained by the content of the standards provides an observable event for students, an event that they can center their thinking around and center their learning around. So in this example, we can use this graph to show that the elk population in Yellowstone National Park has continuously changed, increased and decreased over time since at least 1923 when this graph starts showing data. So that's what we're going to anchor instruction in, right? We're not going to anchor it in the science vocabulary words like ecosystem and dynamics and interactions. We're going to anchor it in. We're going to figure out what's happening in Yellowstone Park and why is this happening in Yellowstone Park.
Okay. Then what?
Then we want to know what students are going to need in order to understand at the middle school level how to explain what's going on in Yellowstone. So based on those standards we looked at, this is a progression of grade level ideas that students will need to be able to understand by the end of this unit of instruction. They're going to need to know that in any ecosystem, organisms and populations with similar requirements for food and water and oxygen and other resources compete, which limits resources, which has an impact on growth and reproduction. They're going to need to know that organisms and the populations of organisms are dependent on their environment, both living and non-living things, that ecosystems are dynamic in nature, that disruptions to an ecosystem can lead to shifts in all of its populations. These are the ideas that students are going to need in order to understand at the end of the unit what's going on in Yellowstone. So now that we know what phenomena is anchoring instruction and we know what content we want students to understand by the end of this unit, if the goal is to address unfinished learning, we now need to find out both what students already know about the content and what they need to have been exposed to previously to access grade level content. And then we can compare those two things and identify any gaps and modify our unit of instruction as needed. So Determining how you will find out what students know about the topic is your first step. So in this example, we could choose to make the Yellowstone ecosystem question observable for students by showing them a video about a particular event that happened in 1995 when humans actually reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone Park. Then the teacher can elicit student thinking by asking a set of questions. Maybe how might reintroducing the wolves affect the park, the cattle ranchers, the local residents that live nearby? Should people even be allowed to hunt wolves? Should people act to resource systems the way they did when they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone? And then just ask students, what questions do you have about this? And for the sake of our example, let's imagine that the teacher asks these questions, the students respond, and the teacher notices that not all students seem to have a good understanding of two prerequisite science ideas. One was from the 3rd grade and one was from the 5th grade. So in the next slide, we can see that in comparing the elementary ideas to the grade level content, the teacher can come to two different conclusions. Either the prerequisite idea really needs to be explicitly incorporated into the unit because without it, students can't access the grade level content, or the prerequisite idea is similar enough to the grade level idea that if students engage in the unit as it's written, it will provide students with an opportunity to build their understanding around that idea. So no modification of the unit is necessary. And here we see an example of both of those conclusions. In the yellow, the 5th grade standard shows that students should have learned that different organisms need different things to survive. For example, producers need sunlight, water, carbon dioxide to make food. Consumers eat other organisms. Decomposers break down dead organisms, etc. That knowledge is actually critical in order for students to access the first middle school grade level idea. Without knowing that the requirements for resources or what the requirements for resources are that different types of organisms have, students can't actually make judgments about an organism's ability to survive in an environment where those resources are limited in some way. So that 5th grade science idea is something we want to explicitly incorporate into our grade level unit because students need it to access the grade level content. On the other hand, the 3rd grade standard, which is in green, embodies an idea that's very similar to the grade level science idea, also in green. So normal progression through the unit is going to provide students with access to this idea. So we don't need to integrate anything into the unit to address that. Okay, so those are the two different decisions that we can make there.
Okay, so let me just make sure I'm tracking here. So I'm going to go back for a second. So we found our phenomena, and then this progression of ideas were the grade level ideas students need in order to really master this concept and really understand this phenomena. And then the eliciting student thinking task was to try to understand what students are coming in with relevant to those grade level concepts, but also relevant to prerequisite concepts or concepts that might be building in those grade levels. And then we found those by just attending to kind of looking at the previous standards and thinking about the key ideas, and then thinking about, is this going to be a barrier to entry or not? And coming to some different conclusions.
Exactly.
Based on the grade level ideas. Okay, great. I'm tracking. All right, what's next?
All right, so we have that one 5th grade standard that we know students need access to. So what are the actions that a teacher can take to address that unfinished learning from 5th grade that we actually illuminated, like you said, by the students' responses to the anchoring phenomena? And the key here is to select tasks that provide access to the gap in learning while also making sure we're maintaining the coherence of the storyline and prioritizing incorporating tasks where students engage in scientific practice to derive evidence and understanding of ideas. This means that stopping grade level instruction and teaching an entire 5th grade unit or 5th grade lesson, that's not our answer, okay? We want to maintain access to grade level content while also attending to the unfinished learning that we've identified. It also means that we're not just telling students this information from 5th grade. Okay, we want them to have the opportunity to build their own understanding through scientific practice, even in these tasks that we're designing to integrate into the unit. So if you take a moment to look at this example of an instructional sequence designed to address the grade level standards, let's think about how we might insert just-in-time support into this set of tasks to introduce the prerequisite 5th grade science idea that's going to allow students to access the grade level content. And we'll see that on the next slide, where there's an example of one option of something we could do outlined, okay? So
can you talk me through like lesson 1 and 2 for just a second, just to make sure I have my head around that?
No problem. So during lesson 1 of the unit, what students are making observations of are living and non-living things in a local environment near the school. That's going to be based on context and where you are, but just a local environment near their school. And they're identifying living and non-living things before they dive into this video on the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone that we talked about before, okay?
Okay.
So in lesson 2, there's going to be an activity where students are going to have to build food webs, and they're going to have to understand the needs of organisms to fully participate in that lesson 2 activity, okay? So where we need to put that integrated task from that 5th grade standard is right here in lesson 1. This is a great place to integrate that task on producers, consumers, and decomposers, which is the missing 5th grade idea, because that's what they're going to need in order to fully engage in lesson 2 of the unit, okay? So the task outlined in blue has students obtaining information, which is a scientific practice, so it still incorporates the practices. They're obtaining that information from a grade level text, and they're applying that information in the already planned discussion about the local environment. So in addition to identifying non-living and living things, they're also going to apply their learning from the text and identify producers and consumers and decomposers in that same local environment. So we've brought in this idea from the 5th grade, right? We've integrated that into what we're already doing on grade level in a way that does not disrupt coherence. And we're allowing students to get practice with that idea before they get to lesson 2, so that they can actually access the grade level content of lesson 2.
Okay, super helpful. So talk us through the process again, now that we've been through one example, just to make sure we see the story.
Yeah, so summarize it, right? This is what planning for unfinished learning in science can look like. We want to identify phenomena to serve as a driver for instruction. Then we want to determine what the grade level science ideas that students will need to access in order to explain that phenomena are. Then we want to make the phenomena observable for students in order to elicit their initial thinking and identify unfinished learning within their current understanding. So what is it that they don't know that they should know by now? And then we want to incorporate tasks to address those identified gaps if they are critical to access to the grade level content. But we want to make sure that those tasks that we use to integrate maintain the coherence of the grade level unit and engage students in scientific practice in order to derive understanding of the science ideas.
So let me just pare it back a couple of things I took away from that. When you talk about maintaining the coherence of the unit, it's like we're not going to do the consumers and decomposers activity on something unrelated to the Yellowstone example. We're going to do it within the Yellowstone example. We're not going to talk about, fishing or something separate. And we're not going to stop and do the 5th grade version of the unit on that standard. We're going to incorporate a version of that task in the 7th grade or 6th grade in the actual grade level unit.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And so just kind of bring us home, Jessica, like, why is this the right approach?
Yeah. So a few things. First of all, we know that committing to phenomena-driven instruction, so identifying that phenomena first, that's going to support accessibility to the content. No matter what prior knowledge students bring to the classroom, no matter what their experience was with science last year or any of the years before they came to us, we can support accessibility to the content through that phenomena. In short, we're not expecting students to be able to explain phenomena to us upfront when they get to us, but we do want to know what they don't know. And we also want them to know what they don't know. That's what scientists do. And so being able to elicit their thinking around a common observed event in the classroom and having students share their initial explanations and ask questions about that observable phenomena, that's going to provide teachers with the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions about what content students need to be exposed to throughout instruction to support access. I mean, if you think about it, asking a student to share what they know about moon phases is a great way to get anyone who doesn't know anything about moon phases to shut down, straight down, right? But asking them to think about the night sky and explain why they think it looked different last night than it did last week, while also eliciting and normalizing that they should have questions and asking them what those questions are, that anchors instruction in something that they've all experienced, something they can all connect to, and that they can all share their current thoughts and understandings about. And then in addition to phenomena, this approach also prioritizes what you just talked about around maintaining the coherent storyline that provides a pathway to explaining the phenomena. And this means that for science, our approach is not about teachers identifying load-bearing or focused standards, right? Instead, we want teachers to understand the way in which key science ideas and themes within a set of standards come together to help students more fully and accurately explain whatever that anchoring phenomena is. In addition, when teachers identify a gap in understanding or a prerequisite idea that students should have been familiar with, and that would impact their ability to understand something on grade level, we want teachers to be really intentional about integrating tasks that engage students in deriving that evidence from scientific practice, because we want that process of science to always be in science classrooms. And we want them to integrate those tasks without sacrificing the coherence of the story that's happening in real time. In this case, it was Yellowstone, but whatever story you're telling in your classroom, we want students to have constant access to that story and to be able to build their understanding of grade level content throughout instruction.
Great. I love it. I'm hearing my 5-year-old who asks me a million questions a day. And I know how tempting it is to just say, well, here's the answer. But I'm hearing you really say, let's remember that students really need to be constructing their understanding, and that science is not like missing the earthquakes unit doesn't prevent you from them digging in on the digestion unit. Like, just go into the digestion unit, but within that unit, think about what are some of the cross-cutting ideas that may need to be shored up within the context of the unit.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Jessica Henderson-Rockette. We are grateful for all you're bringing to our science learning, and hope this is helpful as we continue this tour on unfinished learning across content areas. Thanks so much.
Thank you.